te dejo el rol de la dirección del evento. Está tu micrófono apagado. Está apagado tu micrófono. A ver.
Ya, yo creo que ya, ¿no?
Sí.
¿Me oyen? Ok, perfecto. Buenas tardes. ¿Voy a presentar yo?
Sí, tú vas a presentar.
Surprise for me. Okay. Hi, Professor Bybee. Nice to meet you.
Hello, nice to meet
you.
Hello. Thank you.
Okay, so we are waiting 2 more minutes, or maybe more. English, anyway.
Oh, no, you can present Spanish.
It's okay. Okay, maybe a couple of more minutes in order to everybody coming in. Okay. Okay, I think maybe now we are going to start, okay? So welcome to a new session of our Coloquio de Investigación Lingüística, organized by the Master Program in Linguistics of the University of Sonora, here in Hermosillo, Mexico. This time we are very pleased to have the participation of the Professor Joan Bybee, who is a distinguished Professor Emerita from the Department of Linguistics at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque in the United States. Professor Bybee is a very important linguist known for her outstanding contribution to the study of language in an amazing variety of domains. Her research interests include morphology, phonology, typology and universals, grammaticalization, and speakolinguistics. Her recent work focuses in a usage-based perspective. She's the author of several very important books in linguistics, included one in 2015 about language change, another in 2010 about language usage and cognition, another in 2007 about frequency of use and the organization of language, another in 2001 about phonology and language use. Of course, also our book from 1994 with River Perkins and William Pagluca about the evolution of grammar in the languages of the world. And of course, also a book on morphology from 1985. She's also, with other colleagues, co-editor of several other books about complex sentences in grammar and discourse, about frequency and the emergence of linguistic structure, about language function and language type, or modality in grammar and discourse. So the curriculum of Professor Bybee is very impressive, and it is our great honor that you are present among us. Our presentation today is about sound change as joint innovation. So without further ado, I give her the floor. Please, Professor Bybee, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me share my screen now so that you'll have the presentation. Not finding it. Let's see if this is the right thing to do. How does that look? Okay. This is not the beginning. Sorry. Oops. Now I've messed up again. Sorry about that. There we go. Sorry. So I am going to talk today about sound change. One of the things I keep coming back to, people who work on sound change are always trying to figure out, well, exactly how does it happen? And there have been a lot of theories around. I'm going to talk about one prominent theory, and then I'm going to give a proposal of my own ideas. So on an analogy with biological evolution, Bjorn Lindblom proposed that sound change occurs in 2 steps. So variation plus selection. So a speaker produces some variant, wherever that comes from, and then it becomes selected in that speaker's output, and also it spreads to other speakers. This is very similar to what Bill Croft proposed for in 2002 in his 2002 book on language change, that you have a very strict kind of correlation with biological evolution, that a new variant arises by altered replication, and that's followed by selection. So as, excuse me a minute, I have to get your pictures out of here because they're overlapping. I don't know how to do this. They are overlapping the slides. So I'm kind of in a mess here. Let me see. No, I don't want to do that. Let me go back here. Anyway, so I can't quite see what the slide says. That's kind of a problem. But in a very recent paper by Jonathan Harrington and Stevens, they say that an ongoing challenge in sound change research is to link the theory of sound change within individual cognitive grammars with the diffusion of the novel variants throughout the community. So they consider that a sound change starts in an individual, and then it has to spread to the rest of the community. So why? Well, having never observed the exact moment a sound change is initiated, researchers construct scenarios based on various types of errors that might occur in speaking and comprehending. So the most popular of these was proposed by John Ohala as misperception. So he says if a listener misperceives something in the input, then that misperceived variant can be accepted, and then of course then it undergoes the spread. This is similar, the other points here are similar to coordination failure, excessive production associated with spurious social factors, so people trying to sound more like other people perhaps create some new variant. Another theory by Rich Janda and Brian Joseph, they call the Big Bang theory, that the innovation or initiation taking place in a single individual is abrupt, not gradual, but abrupt. A sound change originates in a very small, highly localized context over a relatively short temporal period. So these are all attempts to find how and a sound change is initiated. And they all seem to suppose that the individuals can innovate on their own, and that different individuals within a community can have different grammars. So that different grammar then has to spread to other speakers. Now, I'm going to present something more like a usage-based conception of this process, where I'll argue that the language users register the range of variation that is present in their experience. And to the extent that users share experience, their cognitive representations will be similar. In this presentation, I will propose that the link between speaker and listener, individual and community, is much tighter than these models assume. I argue that we do not need to distinguish innovation from spread, and we do not need to identify a one-time event for innovation. So in the end, sound change can be gradual in every sense. Now, these are two basic predispositions of my own point of view, just to tell you where I'm coming from. One is that I view grammar as emergent. There are no discrete boundaries in the language system, so dichotomies such as phonetics and phonology, morphology, syntax, grammar usage, semantic pragmatics have no clear dividing lines. And two, other types of change, such as grammaticalization, are gradual and take place through events in which the speaker and listener are cooperating and share the same knowledge. So I want to apply these predispositions to what I'm going to tell you about sound change. Now, first, the problem of phonetics versus phonology. One reason the initiation of a sound change is often thought to be abrupt and a single event is that it is assumed that a phonetic change has to jump over the line between phonetics and phonology. And some people even think that a sound change hasn't occurred until it's somehow gotten into the phonology. And yet, the people who examine this distinction are forced to conclude that it's not clear where to draw the line. So I'm suggesting perhaps we don't have a clear line between phonetics and phonology. So if we take that perspective, that there's a continuum from fine phonetic distinctions to phonologized categories, then sound change would start in the ubiquitous phonetic variation that accompanies all speech. In fact, almost everybody agrees about that. Most researchers agree that the source of sound change is the pool of phonetic variation. So the question is, do we need a special event of misperception or some other error to get sound change started? Now, I'm also going to present here the notion of exemplar representation, which has been established as at least an alternative in phonological representations over the last 20-some years. Within traditional phonemic theory and generative theory, it's assumed that cognitive representations of speech require abstract segments, phonemes, basically. But considerable evidence has emerged lately to demonstrate that language users record phonetic detail in cognitive representations, not just abstract phonemic forms. And the idea is that phonetically similar tokens of experience are organized into exemplars, such as the phonetic variants of the Spanish phoneme D, which would include fricative exemplars in addition to highly weakened exemplars, and of course, full stop exemplars too. The evidence for exemplar representation has been presented in a number of studies, though I was proposing this because of gradual lexical diffusion. Lexical diffusion is the process by which a sound change spreads to the different words of the lexicon. And the fact that some words undergo change earlier than others gives us evidence for exemplar representations. For example, some Spanish words with intervocalic phoneme D have more reduction than others. So for example, higher frequency nada has more reduction of its D than cada. Cada, of course, is highly frequent too, but there is a difference between them in frequency. And lado, for example, is a word that often has a very reduced medial consonant, more so than grado, and puedo more than quedo. So in order to represent this systematic properties of words when they're undergoing a sound change, we need to be able to represent in speakers' cognitive representation ranges of variation, that is, different phonetic exemplars. Another example, or another piece of evidence is phonetic detail in social and regional dialects. Folks in Doherty show that within a single community, older men, women, and children all display systematically different ranges of phonetic variation. And this is part of the knowledge that speakers have about their dialect. So speakers have a lot of knowledge about phonetics. And in fact, that's a theme of this whole talk, is to present ways in which speakers are using phonetic detail. So, and exemplars are associated in memory with phonetic context, like intervocalic context, but also social context, who you're talking to and in what circumstances. So rather than language users having discrete phonemic representation, that is, for example, all Spanish D phonemes being represented as a stop, voice stop in memory, we're saying that cognitive representations of words are clusters of exemplars representing a range of variation. So speakers with similar experience will have very similar ranges of phonetic variation. And change will take place when some variants become more common than others. So the change can be very gradual in the relative frequency of different exemplars and the establishment of new exemplars as well. My goal in the following presentation then is to argue that with this conception of phonetic representation, we don't need to distinguish speaker and listener in sound change, and we do not need to explain community spread as separate from innovation, provided the speakers are in something that we might call the same community. So here are my two arguments. The first is that speech is a highly practiced, highly skilled activity. This applies both to motor production as well as perception and comprehension. And my second argument is that speaker and listener are participating in a highly coordinated, cooperative process when they are conversing. So argument one. I'm trying to go on to argument one. It has frozen up. Sorry, my screen has frozen up here. And I'm not sure what to do except to keep punching the same button. Let me escape for a minute. No, everything's gone. Oh, boo-hoo. Are you all there?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. I haven't heard from you in a bit. So I'm sorry that my screen has somehow frozen up. And anybody got suggestions of what to do? I'm trying escape.
Just give it a minute, so we need to process the. Just give it a minute.
Wait.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. That's very funny. I could stop screen sharing and then I'd have maybe more options, but I can't even, oh there, let's see. What do you think? Should I stop?
I guess that would be the best way.
Oh wait,
Yeah.
no, look,
Okay.
you did it.
There it is.
Something happened. Okay, so I'm talking about skilled behavior. Playing the piano is a highly skilled behavior. I know this, I do it. I think a lot about how learning a piece or playing a piece is like language. So highly skilled behavior, it arises through practice. Anybody who plays an instrument knows that, or sings, but also anybody who speaks a language, especially one that's not native, knows that practice is extremely important. The results of practice are a fluent performance and greater speed if you need it. But that isn't really, those two things, as important as they are not really the main goal of practice. Instead, practice gives you the control that allows for expressiveness. So when you're playing a piece, you want to be able to make some parts louder by, or gradually get louder by crescendo. You might want to make some get softer. You might, accelerando means go a little faster, retardando means slow down. All of these parts of the expression require practice, and you can't really do them until you've automated and you've gotten fluent. Once you're fluent, you can control this expressiveness. Now, what happens when you have a lot of repetition? Well, highly practiced sequences of actions come to be processed as chunks, which are automatized. So that could be sequences of syllables, sequences of words, constructions are all automatized through repetition. And therefore, they can be used while the conscious focus is on the content, which we all know for a fluent speaker, you can think about what you want to say, and then the production is fairly automatic. But as we know from various studies, chunks do not entirely lose their internal structure. Even automated units can be manipulated for focus, for emphasis, for backgrounding, and other expressive purposes. So what I'm saying is that one of the important things about language being a highly skilled behavior is that you can manipulate a lot of the phonetics, basically, emphasis and so on, for expressive purposes. Okay, now, so that's all about skill behavior. Now, let's talk about this behavior within a speech community. It's fundamental to the human ability to communicate with language. Well, what is fundamental is a finely tuned social cognition that includes joint attention and the understanding of others' intentions, as, for example, Mike Tomasello has pointed out. So we don't just have a cognition in isolation from others. We're constantly working together with others in our social cognition. Now, a few things that are important for phonetics are, for example, the role of imitation. So Tomasello points out that in acquisition, and as well as, well, in acquisition, for example, but also in communicating within a conversation, imitation is important. That's related also to what's been called accommodation. So some researchers have found that the person, in a dyad of speaker and listener, the speakers will accommodate to one another. That is, their phonetics will grow more similar. A lot of these studies are on English, where vowels change a lot via dialect. Well, when people are speaking to one another, their vowels tend to converge, and that's accommodation. This is also some related to what's been called entrainment or movement synchrony, where people that are in a social event together tend to synchronize their movements. For example, in a conversation, when people synchronize their gestures. There's also accommodation and synchrony in the speed with which you deliver. So if you talk to someone who's talking very slowly, you tend to talk slowly. If they're talking very fast, you might speed up. So there is a lot of accommodation and imitation. And so if speakers in a conversation do this, then the result over multiple repetitions is a set of very similar motor patterns in the members of the community. This we all know, that people within their dialect area speak very much like one another. But I do want to go on now about conversation some, because within a conversation, and that's where sound change takes place, the speaker and the listener are engaged with one another on multiple levels, including the phonetic. To some degree, they're imitating, accommodating, synchronizing a very fine level of detail. One thing that Bjorn Lindblom pointed out in a 1990 paper, which is on hypo and hyperarticulation, that the speaker and hearer share a lot of knowledge. And a lot of that is non-linguistic knowledge. So knowledge of what the other person knows. So I'm speaking to you, assuming you all know something about phonology and phonetics and sound change, for example. But what I want to focus on is linguistic knowledge, because we have a lot of linguistic knowledge that's not just in the words and their meanings or even in the grammar. So for one thing, there's a lot of knowledge about the prior probability or the frequency of a word, and that affects how much it can be reduced or not. Then there's the probability of a word occurring in a certain context. Again, that can determine how much the word can be reduced phonetically, or whether the word's been mentioned in the same discourse. These are all recent findings that people have talked about in the literature. I want to mention two other uses of phonetic variation that require that occur in conversations that show us phonetic variation in constructions. So first, a paper that I recently did that shows phonetic correlates of constructions. So we know that some constructions have intonational contours associated with them. Others have accent and duration patterns. So for example, in English, there are compound words that have a certain stress pattern. In this paper that we recently published, we show that the duration of vowels in English adjectives differs according to whether they are in an attributive construction or a predicative construction. So this would mean the attributive is wet feed. We're talking about feed for animals. Oh, you feed them wet feed, so that's attributive. Predicative is that's sad. I think that's sad. Because that doesn't allow for any individuality. So predicative, it follows a copula. Now, these two uses, when we coded about 1,000 cases of adjectives in conversation, and we looked at a wide range of factors that might predict their vowel duration, and construction type, that is it attributive or predicative, was significant in predicting vowel duration. And the attributive adjective was shorter. The one that's within the noun phrase, as in wet feed, was shorter than the one that's predicative, as in that's sad. Now, also there were other factors, lexical adjective and phonological factors and so on. But this effect was very strong, and it was independent of the prosodic effect conditioned by a following pause, where you lengthen the word before the pause. So we found that construction type was an important predictor of the phonetics of the duration of the vowel. Here's another example. Phonetic variation provides cues to the prosodic grouping the speaker wants to convey. So, for example, in a study by Barth Weingarten and Cooper Coolin, they studied tokens of conjoined verb phrases in English conversation. These phrases can represent two events, and they can be produced as two separate actions in the conversation, or they can represent one event and be produced as a single action in the conversations. There's a little iconicity there with what's intended and what goes on in the conversation. So here's an example. This is going to be This is called a hendiadic construction, where the two verb phrases are really just one event. And these are from real conversations, so you have to know the context. So B is talking about her friend Dinah, who compulsively borrows money. She says, I was sitting in her house and Reg Oakley came and delivered something. Then she goes on to say that Dinah said she didn't have the money for it and wanted to borrow some money. Okay, what we're focusing on is came and delivered. It was produced as one event. There were no pitch or tempo changes. The final contour is undelivered. The verb phrase one is not accented. And plus verb phrase two are in the same rhythmic foot. And is cliticized to verb phrase one and has a reduced vowel. So by all those phonetic cues, you mean that it wasn't that Reg came and then he delivered something. It's as if one event occurred, he came and delivered it. Now that contrasts with another type where the two verb phrases are two events. And so there are two units in conversation. So Chloe is talking to Claire about how frustrated she was in a recent bridge game watching another player. This is a card game. So she says, she was very frustrated. She said, I should get up and go to the bathroom or put on some makeup. Now, in this case, there was a pause before and, so I should get up. There was a glottal onset for and a pitch change. So then you know that get up and go to the bathroom were two different events. The authors then go on to demonstrate that these two extreme cases, that these are extreme cases, and there are a lot of intermediate cases as well. Speakers can manipulate how they want the conjoined VPs to be interpreted. Given 96 instances of hendiadic constructions, pitch reset and prosodic breaks around and correlate significantly with judgments of whether one event or two are intended. This means that speakers and listeners are attending to and interpreting prosodic breaks, pitch changes, glottal onsets, rhythmic feet, degrees of accent, and degrees of vowel reduction all at the same time. It's pretty remarkable, don't you think? I said it's pretty remarkable. I want to say a little bit more about that because my point is how good speakers are at interpreting all of this phonetic detail and how they work together, the two of them, or however many speakers and listeners there are, they work together to get this understanding that's fairly subtle. Okay, here's another example of, we did that. Okay, so here's another example of conversation, a cooperative activity. I don't know if you all are at all familiar with conversational analysis, but a big finding is that participants use phonetic and syntactic cues to determine when turns end. They also finish each other's sentences. They co-construct clauses and create what you could call a chorus of co-production. So here's an example of a conversation. So D says, they're talking about a book. This explains Judaism. The other one says, not really. And then D says at almost the same time in big print in 218 pages. And then K says, Greg got it. D says, that's nice. And D says, for your daughter. And K says, from the library, both at the same time. So K and D co-construct a clause, Greg got it for your daughter from the library. They're doing this together. They're not talking. One says this and one says that. They are making this conversation together. So that's what we mean by conversation as a cooperative activity. Okay, so back to joint innovation and sound change. Of course, speakers are listeners, listeners are speakers, and it's important to make that point. There's an interesting research by Bedore lately on the way that a person's own set of phonetic variants when they are speaking influences how they comprehend someone else's set of phonetic variations. Notice that speakers and hearers are equally skilled at both tasks, and the two tasks, of course, feed into one another through the cooperative activity of conversing. So with regard to the way sound change occurs, let's go back to Lindblom. He has so many interesting observations. Lindblom and his colleagues point out that patterns of hypo and hyperarticulation. So hypo articulation is reduction. Hyperarticulation is strengthening or articulating carefully. The patterns for these hypo and hyperarticulation, and that might be vowel lengthening and vowel reduction, they're conventionalized in a community. Many studies show that community members have overlapping ranges of variation. Because speakers within a community have similar production routines, as they compress and reduce these routines, the result is fairly consistent across speakers. So again, what I'm saying is speakers are alike in this variation that we're talking about. So within a speech community, if you have T undergoing reduction, say intervocalically, what you do not have happening is one speaker producing a glottal stop, another one a D voicing, another one flapping, and another one a fricative. Rather, for all the reasons I just mentioned, the direction of reduction is the same among the speakers who regularly converse with one another. Here's another short illustration of that. A small change in a pattern, usually towards hypo, that's reduction or assimilation, does not occur in one individual and then spread to others, but can occur at approximately the same time across a group of individuals. The existing patterns of gestural movement hold within them the seeds of change. So here's something from a paper on English clusters of STR. There's something going on right now in American English where some speakers, I'm not one of them, but they, instead of the S, they produce something more like an esh. So they say, instead of strong, they say strong or struggle or stream. And I'm hearing that a lot lately. So these researchers then could identify speakers who were retractors, and you would see them over on the right-hand side where the S in STR clusters is very much like an esh. These would be retractors. They could also identify non-retractors, but what's important is even the non-retractors showed some retraction. So everybody does some retraction in an STR cluster, and only some have moved it farther along. The ones who aren't doing it yet, they may move it farther along too through these processes of imitation and accommodation. Well, it's kind of frozen up again. But I'm just to the conclusion here. So I guess we'll just give it a little time to think. Anybody have any questions in the meantime? Comments? I think I know the trick now to get it going. Okay, so Lindblom's, here's a kind of funny illustration. Lindblom's H&H, that's hypo and hyperarticulation theory, emphasizes that the needs of the speaker and listener are different and even in conflict. So the speaker, presumably, I don't know that I agree with this, is trying to expend as little effort as possible, but the hearer needs needs a certain amount of information, so they're sort of in conflict, as if there were some duel going on. I don't quite agree with that, because there's so much convention in our conversation and so much coordination that I believe it's more like a nice dance, ballroom dance, where people are working together, not against each other. So, conclusions. Language users are highly skilled at what they do. Their skills are highly entrenched. That is, they're automatized. They're fairly consistent. This the entrenchment allows them to manipulate both the grammar and the phonetics of their utterances for expressive effects. Conversing is a cooperative activity based on shared knowledge, skills, and goals. We share goals in a conversation, that is, of passing information and evaluations back and forth. Patterns of conversation are highly conventionalized. So it seems unlikely that an error would become incorporated into the individual skills or the conventional patterns of the language. Rather, it seems more likely that change arises precisely from the shared conventions of language use. The theories that require a two-step process of innovation and spread envision sound change in the grammar, where grammar is an abstraction. In a usage-based theory, the grammar is the cognitive representation of the experience, and the degree of abstraction is a matter of empirical verification. I mean, there is abstraction, but we don't quite know exactly what it is and how it works. Exemplar theory recognizes that phonetic detail is important to the use of language, and that the speaker and hearer share a great deal of knowledge about the context for phonetic variation. Language users with shared production and perception systems have the same tendencies towards hyper and hypoarticulation. And since as conversing is a cooperative, not a competitive activity, these tendencies can produce innovations that are shared from the very beginning. Okay, thank you very much.
Many thanks for this very interesting presentation. So we are now opening a period of time for comments, questions in English, but also maybe in Spanish, if you don't mind.
Well, you may have to help me a little.
Okay, sure.
But I think I'll stop sharing now if I can. If I can do that. Nope, I missed that. Oh dear. Okay, let me go back to Zoom. Hello, Zoom. Oh, there we are. Hello. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Any questions? And yeah, we can try Spanish. If I have trouble comprehending, somebody can translate for me.
Sure.
Okay.
Hello, Albert. Can I?
Of course. Go ahead.
Hello. Thanks a lot for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have, like a doubt about what is the main difference between the this conception of the phonetic variation usage for making like construction differences, and well, at the end you have to, I assume that there is some process of so-called like phonologization of this phonetic variation, and when it's used to convey some kind of like conventionalized meaning, and then it is like phonological, it is due to a phonological category. I don't know if I explain myself well, but I would like to know if what's the main difference, if you can explain it.
Okay, so one point you made is that if a phonetic difference is connected to a construction, well, then we should consider it phonologized, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
So
I assume that, yes.
yeah, well, I think that's correct. What I'm arguing against is some really discrete difference. Oh, this is phonetics and this is phonology.
Okay.
I think of them as a continuum.
Okay.
And that continuum even goes on beyond phonologization to morphologization, right? To become entrenched in the morphology too. So, but I think the researchers I'm arguing against have this idea that these are more discrete differences. And therefore, in order for something, and they also seem to assume, and you may not assume this, I don't know, that it's not a sound change until it's phonologized or phonemicized even. And I don't think that's true. I think it's a sound change as soon as you have variation, something has changed.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And then, and I'm open because I don't know exactly how abstract, even if you accept exemplar theory, I don't know how abstract the categorizations can be. I mean, I think there are groupings. We know there are similarities among sounds. So I have a lot of open questions too.
Okay. Okay. I see. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, there are some kind of, sometimes speakers can realize even like consciously, like there is something happening even if it doesn't make a phonological category different, just like the phonetic outcome or something, or even dialect variation or something like that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and also I'm kind of assuming, I mean, I'm very much assuming that I'm talking about a fairly uniform community, which I know is very hard to define. And I know that if you had, when you have two dialects that are fairly different, well, any accommodation there has to be different, right? But I'm just trying to point out that speakers and hearers can do all this together.
Okay.
That's kind of my main point.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Thank you for your answer and your presentation.
Thanks for the question.
Another question?
Hi there. I would like to make a question. My name is Amaranta.
Go ahead.
About the information, you say that it's common linguistic knowledge between two speakers in a conversation. It comes to my mind what happened with those cases where, as you say, there are dialects in contact where maybe they know certain word is present in the context, as has been mentioned before, but they are not quite sure in what, how it's been mentioned, or what was the intention of mention that word. Like how this kind of context change when there is more pragmatic information that might be more relevant than the phonetic information at the point.
Exactly, that's a very good point. That there are so many sources of information that you can override the phonetic one. Exactly. Yeah. That's a very good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question or comment?
Albert, I have a question for Professor Bybee. Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoy it. It was very interesting. I have a question about this phenomenon that you mentioned about two BPs when they occur with one another. That is the case of the examples such as go get, try, and repair in those particular instances. So you mentioned that when these two verbs, these two BPs combine with one another to express one single event, they show a list of phonetic properties.
Yes.
And on the other hand, when they appear adjacent to one another and they refer to two different events, they may show other types of properties. I'm just wondering to what extent this list, my understanding is that this is not in a study that you conducted, it was someone else conducted. but I would like to know your thoughts on this. I don't know to what extent this list of phonetic properties will be different according to the type of verb that appears in the VP as the verb phrase in the first place, such as my understanding is that in English, at least, you may have something like go, try, and sit. I don't know if I'm correct with that one, but I don't know to what extent these properties may influence this list of phonetic cues that may appear in this construction. I don't know to what extent it may be relevant.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting observation because some of these, like tryan, is almost grammaticalized. So there's a lot more reduction in try and more fusion with and in that particular example than if it's some other. So it's an interesting thing because it's a source of things that can grammaticalize and undergo further reduction, while it's still something that speakers can control very actively. And even with try, you could back off some and say, I tried and I couldn't do it. Or I tried and, well, that one is two real clauses. But anyway, it's manipulable, but there's also a lexical effect. And I think it is an interesting example because it shows, gosh, how many things you have to take into account, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point. Mm-hmm.
More questions or comments? Adelante. Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Hey, how are you? It was very interesting, your talk. I have a very basic question, I think, which is then when would you say that a sound change has been phonologized? I mean, because for me, that's part of the problem in many usage-based theories. When we all agree that well, not we all agree, but many people agree that some changes are not happening all at once, even in terms of language acquisition, like following Tomasello's theory. But at some point, there has to be a qualitative change in terms of the system, like the system changes, right? Like children acquiring, knowing that there is not just a kicker, a singer, and so on, but there is a subject. There is a qualitative change at some point. Also, in terms of sound change, even though there is lexical diffusion and it is gradual, there is a point in which the system changes. And for me, that's the problem. When does it happen? I mean, I know that there is no simple question, but when would you say that a sound has changed?
Well, although I think the change might occur sooner, a very good diagnostic is when you lose the phonetic conditioning. So if, like the things that Bedore studies, the vowel plus nasal consonant, and the vowel nasalizes, the nasal consonant grows shorter and shorter, and at some point the nasal consonant disappears, well then for sure, you've got a new phoneme. But I think that the importance of the vowel nasalization shows up way before that happens. And like I think in English, vowel nasalization is almost phonemic, in the sense that you really have to produce it. You can't just not do it. And the shortening of the nasal consonant before voiceless stop is very important to comprehension. Mm-hmm. So even though it's all still predictable in a typical phonemic analysis, what speakers are doing is using, and experiments have shown this, like the difference between when you say can't, C-A-N''T, you can't really put a nasal consonant in there, because if you do, I'll understand it as can, which is a problem, So,
yeah,
yeah, so we might have to use more experimental techniques to find out when this distinction has become important, you know.
Yes, I know. I mean, I remember some old studies that show that perception is categorical.
Yes.
I mean, but that's for each individual, but I'm talking more about the system. And I guess your example about consonants makes a lot of sense because of the articulation itself of the consonants. But if you think about vowel shift,
Yeah.
I guess it is a little bit different there, right? Because
yeah.
There is no exact point of articulation. I mean, it is somewhat different. And perhaps I was thinking about a vowel shift when I asked the question.
Yes, and you know, it's kind of funny because I've mostly studied consonants, and you know, other people study vowels, and you end up with it's a good point. I think there's a little doubt now about the categorical perception experiments too, you know, because they're done quite out of context. You know, they're like pop, 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 you know. And it would be much better to do them in context. But yeah, okay, well, I think those are all valid questions and problems for sure. But I do think maybe experimental approaches, and then recognizing that speakers could be using things as distinctive even while they're phonemically predictable, you know. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Yeah.
More questions or comments for Professor Bybee?
Well, so far, those are the best questions and comments I've ever gotten on this talk. So, but let's have more.
Okay, let's try. No more questions? Maybe one about the possible application of your theory and this idea of joint innovation, but in the domain of grammar change.
Oh yeah, well, I think that like in grammaticalization, it's very clear that the speaker and hearer know what all the possible pragmatic implications are, and they use them together. And as those pragmatic inferences become more common, then you know you get them sometimes being more important than the original semantic content. I think that happens together with speakers, and if the speakers and hearers aren't doing the same kind of pragmatic inferencing, there's going to be a disconnect. They're not going to be understanding each other. So actually, this idea about sound change comes partly from how I think about how grammaticalization proceeds, that it's very gradual, and people they're sort of headed in the same direction, doing the same sorts of things. And by multiple repetitions of use of pragmatics in context, you get semantic change, and you get change in constituent structure and so on.
Okay, thanks. One more question, maybe? It's almost 1 o'clock.
Have another one if no one else
of course
asks. I was wondering whether there are some domains in which this coordination you talk about happens more easily than others. I was thinking, I mean, in terms of intonation, I've seen like it's happening to me. It has happened to me before that I'm speaking with people who speak other dialects from Spanish, and I tend to accommodate sometimes the intonation. But at the same, so it made a lot of sense what you said. But on the other hand, I was thinking on other cases in which I was writing a dictionary. And so I was eliciting all the pronunciations of the same word in a fairly small community, indigenous community. And to me, people were pronouncing completely different words, or at least in some vowels or some glottal features were completely different. And people weren't really aware that they were pronouncing different, the same word in different ways. So I guess in that case, there is no coordination, but rather people have different systems, and they're so used to those different systems coexisting in the same community that they are not really aware of that. And historically, I could say, okay, the change goes from this direction to this direction because I have analyzed other dialects of the same language, or rather other Mijo languages. But within the same community, two speakers were pronouncing the same word in different ways, and they were not really aware until I pointed out that, so you're saying this and this person is saying that, and they were like, that's right, that's funny. So I'm trying to, I mean, even though I agree with you and it makes a lot of sense, I'm trying to accommodate all these facts with your theory, and I was wondering what your take on that was.
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but it is true that well, across dialects we accept that people say things differently, but there's sometimes a little accommodation, even if you're trying not to accommodate, right? But in this case, so maybe, yeah, so within the community, they're aware that some people say it this way and some people say it that way. And they're fairly different phonetically. I would, no.
Not really. I mean, like change from a to a schwa, or like from a glottalist vowel to a rearticulated and aspirated vowel. I mean, to me, I mean, since I'm trying to learn the language, those changes are, I mean, probably I don't know which changes are significant, which changes are not significant for them. And to me, all of them are really significant. I don't know.
That's very interesting, as a small community too. Yeah, so that, so I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I think it's very interesting. And it's also possible that, you have certain community conventions of, well, they say it that way, we say it this way, although they're unaware of them. I don't know. That's a very good point. Thank you.
Okay. So it's now 9 o'clock. We have no more question for Professor Bybee. So many thanks for your very interesting presentation and your participation in our little academic event. Thanks all for your assistance, and we give all of you an appointment for the next week, same day, Friday, same hour. Okay. Muchas gracias, Profesora Bybee. Okay. Oh, maybe the video. So
thank you very much.
Many thanks. And muchas gracias a todos. Sarina, no sé si quieras decir algo.
Gracias, Joan. Thank you very much, Joan, for your willing to be here. Thank you.
Okay. So,
questions.
Okay, perfect. So, viernes próximo, Valentín Peralta, Valentín creo que estaba con nosotros, presenta sobre construcciones posesivas en el náhuatl. Ok, entonces pues los esperamos todos el próximo viernes, misma hora a las 2 entonces. Muchas gracias, profesora Bybee. Nos vemos.
Welcome.
Bye,
Bye.
bye.
Gracias.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Muchas gracias.
Bye, bye.
Gracias.
Buen fin de semana para todos.
Thank you.
Bye.